The evening rain fell in thin silver lines, soaking the streets of Lagos and tapping against the window of the servants' quarters. Inside, Joy sat on the narrow edge of her iron bed, clutching a small cotton bag that held everything she owned. Her hands trembled as she tried to fold her uniform one last time. It was strange how quickly life could turn. Just the day before, she had woken up before dawn, lit the stove, and prepared breakfast for the family she served, believing foolishly that if she worked hard enough, she would always have a place to belong. But tonight, she was alone, cast out like dirty water. Earlier that morning, the sun had risen softly over the Sony residence, spilling gold across the cream-painted walls. Joy moved through the kitchen like she always did, silent, steady, careful. The sizzle of hot oil, the scrape of the spoon on the pot, the quiet sound of her slippers on the polished floor. All of it so familiar it felt like breathing. No one noticed the girl who made their lives comfortable. No one thanked her for the hours she spent scrubbing away their mess. And she was content with that until the man of the house decided her silence meant permission. Femi had been watching her for months. His eyes followed her from the moment Madame Agnes left for work. When Joy bent to pick up a fallen toy, when she fetched water, when she ironed school uniforms, he watched her dot at first. She told herself it was nothing, just curiosity, maybe even pity. But soon the looks turned into words. The words became whispers. The whispers grew into threats. "Joy," he had murmured one afternoon as she scrubbed the hallway tiles, "you are too pretty to be a housemaid. You should be somewhere better, somewhere with me." Her heart had thumped so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. She had stood, avoiding his gaze, and fled to the safety of the kitchen. But there was no safety. Not in that house, and when she finally found her courage and told him to stop, he laughed. A cold, soft laugh that made her skin crawl. "You think my wife will believe you over me?" he asked, leaning close enough that she could smell the sweet juice on his breath. "You are nothing here. Nothing." It turned out he was right this morning when he spun a lie that she had tried to seduce him. Madame Agnes did not even look at Joy's face before she ordered her to pack her things. There were no questions, no chance to explain, only the guards. Rough hands on her arms, the slam of the iron gate behind her, and now as the rain trickled under the door and soaked the edge of her wrapper, she wondered if her mother would ever forgive her, or if she would forgive herself. She wiped her eyes and stood, breathing slow to calm the quake in her chest, because this was not the end. Somewhere in this dark night, something was waiting for her, a stranger she had never met, a kindness she could not imagine. And in the most broken moment of her life, Joy was about to discover that destiny often arrives dressed as disaster. Rain had become her only companion by the time Joy stepped off the main road and into a dimly lit lane lined with shuttered shops and sleeping dogs. She moved like a ghost in scene, unwanted. Each step splashed through cold puddles, soaking the hem of her wrapper. A few passers-by glanced at her, but nobody stopped. Why would they? She was just another girl carrying a bag stuffed with regrets when her legs could no longer carry her. She sank onto a low cement ledge in front of a closed pharmacy. The metal shutter was rusted, the sign overhead cracked and faded. It looked as forgotten as she felt. She curled her arms around her knees and pressed her forehead down to hide her tears. All she could think about was her mother's voice in the last message she'd listened to 2 days ago. "My daughter, remember, you are strong, even when the world calls you weak." But strength felt like a story someone else had told her. Tonight, she had none left. A distant honk snapped her head up. A large black SUV was idling at the mouth of the lane, wipers slashing rain from the windshield. The engine purred low and steady. The headlights flicked off and the door opened. Out stepped a tall man in a dark jacket holding a large umbrella that glowed blue under the street lamp. He stood beside the car for a moment, scanning the row of shuttered shops. Then his eyes found her. Joy's heart stuttered. She thought about standing, running, hiding, but her body refused to move. He walked toward her with calm steps, stopping a few feet away. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the umbrella. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, careful. Joy swallowed, unable to look up. She stared at the wet concrete. "I am fine," she lied. He did not believe her. She could feel it. "Do you have somewhere to go?" She almost laughed at the question. Somewhere to go? The only place she belonged had spit her out like rotten fruit. He took another step closer, stopping when she flinched. "I'm not here to frighten you," he said gently. "If you look like you've been out here all night, let me help you." "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please just leave me alone." He nodded slowly, as though he expected that answer. But he did not turn away. "My name is Chike," he said after a pause. "I'm not going to touch you. Not going to ask anything of you. But you look like you need rest, food, and a place to think. Not everyone in this city will hurt you." Her breath caught. Not everyone. She lifted her eyes just enough to see his face in the glow of the streetlight. He looked tired in a way she recognized, like someone who knew what it was to lose everything. He set the umbrella handle carefully into her shaking hands. "Hold this," he said quietly. Before she could protest, he stepped back to the SUV, opened the rear passenger door, and pulled out a folded blanket. He brought it over and draped it around her shoulders, moving with the slow care of someone tending a wounded bird. The warmth of the fleece soaked into her cold skin. She tried to push it away, but her fingers wouldn't obey. Chike knelt so they were almost eye to eye. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, voice steady. "And you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but it's not safe here. Let me take you somewhere warm, just for tonight." Joy swallowed hard. She wanted to say no, to keep her last scrap of pride. But the rain was growing colder, her limbs weaker. She was so tired. "How do I know you're not lying?" she whispered, her voice raw. His dark eyes searched her face without flinching. "You don't," he admitted. "But maybe you can trust that anyone who means harm wouldn't be out here in the rain trying to give you a blanket." The words sank into the hollow place inside her chest. She looked down at her hands, gripping the soft fleece, the chipped polish on her nails, the trembling she couldn't stop. "Thank you," he said softly. "Come, I'll drive you to my Annie's house. She will help you get clean and fed. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." He held out his hand. For a moment she hesitated. Then, moving as though her bones had turned to glass, she took it. He guided her to the SUV and opened the back door again. She climbed in, clutching her bag and the blanket. The door closed, shutting out the sound of rain as the car pulled away from the lane. Joy pressed her forehead to the cold window and let her eyes drift shut. This was dangerous, foolish, maybe even a mistake. But something inside her, a tiny flicker she hadn't felt in a long time, dared to hope that she had just stepped into the beginning of something she could not yet name. Joy didn't remember falling asleep. When her eyes opened again, she was no longer in the city. The SUV had stopped in front of a tall, cream-colored house with a high gate and a garden that gleamed in the early morning light. Flowers were blooming along the walkway. It looked like something out of a picture book. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming, till she turned and saw Chike watching her from the driver's seat, his eyes calm and steady. "We're here," he said softly, as though afraid any loud sound might shatter her. "Where is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My auntie's house. I called her while you were sleeping. She's expecting you." Joy swallowed, staring at the gate. She thought about running, about demanding he take her back to the street so she could disappear. But the exhaustion in her bones was louder than fear. Chike stepped out first, coming around to open the door for her. As she climbed down, her knees nearly buckled. He didn't touch her. He simply stood close enough that she could steady herself against the car. The gate swung open with a soft creak. A woman in her 50s walked out to meet them, her hair wrapped in a bright blue scarf. She wore a simple gown and soft sandals. Her face was lined, but her eyes were kind. "This is my Auntie Ifamo," Chike said. "Auntie, this is Joy." Ifyama studied her with a kind of gaze that saw too much. "Welcome, my dear," she said gently. "Come inside." Joy hesitated. She still held her bag tight against her chest as though it contained her last scrap of safety. "You don't have to be afraid here," Ifama said, her voice quiet but firm. "Nobody will harm you." Something in her tone so sure, so patient, broke the last of Joy's defenses. She nodded, unable to speak. Inside the house was warm and bright, filled with the scent of fresh bread and hibiscus. Ifyama led her to a small guest room. Sunlight streamed across a neat bed covered in a white quilt. A folded towel and a clean gown rested on the pillow. "You can bathe," Ifyama said. "I'll bring you some food." Joy stood there, frozen, overwhelmed by the softness. She didn't belong in places like this. She didn't deserve any of it. But her body was past the point of caring. She stepped into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. When she saw herself in the mirror, she flinched. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lips cracked and dry. She looked like a stranger. The hot water stung her skin, washing away the dust and sweat. When she was clean, she wrapped the towel around herself and stood in front of the mirror again. Under all that grime, she was still Joy, still alive, and maybe, just maybe, still worth saving. She put on the fresh gown and returned to the bedroom, where a tray of steaming yam porridge waited. She sat cross-legged on the floor and ate slowly, every bite tasting like something she'd been denied too long. Ifyama came to sit across from her, resting her hands on her knees. "My nephew says you had a difficult night," she said quietly. Joy looked down. "It was more than just a night," she whispered. "It's been months." "You don't have to tell me everything," Ifyama said. "But you can if you need to." The words sat between them in the warm room. Joy closed her eyes, and before she knew it, everything began to spill out. The long days in that duplex, the way Femi's eyes followed her, the night he cornered her by the bookshelf, the lies he told Agnes, the humiliation of being dragged into the street like a thief. When she finished, her throat felt raw. Her eyes were swollen, but she felt lighter. Ifyama reached across and took her hand in both of hers. "My dear," she said softly, "what happened to you was wrong. It was evil, but you are still here. That means your story isn't over." Joy couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such certainty. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Ifyama squeezed her hand gently, then stood. "You rest. You are safe here." When she was gone, Joy lay down on the bed. The blankets smelled like lavender. For the first time in months, she slept without dreaming. She woke to the hush of early evening. The house was quiet, the air cooling as dusk crept in. She found her way to the kitchen, where Ifyama stood over a pot of pepper soup. "Feeling better?" Ifyama asked with a warm smile. "Yes, Ma," Joy said. "Good. You will eat again, and then Chike wants to speak with you. Only if you feel up to it." Joy's stomach tightened. "What does he want?" she asked carefully. "He didn't say," Ifyama replied, "but I trust him. You can too." Joy didn't answer. Trust was not something she could give so easily. After dinner, she followed Ifyama to a small sitting room. Chike was waiting, seated near a low table piled with files. He rose when she entered. "Joy," he said softly. "Please, sit." She lowered herself into the chair opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. "I won't keep you long," he said, his voice calm, "but I wanted to tell you why I stopped for you." Joy met his eyes and said nothing. She had wondered all day why a man like him, a stranger, would care. "What happened to a girl like her?" "My mother was a housemaid," Chike began. "Before she met my father, she worked in houses not so different from the one you described. She told me many times how easy it is for people to believe the worst about a poor woman, especially when a rich man is telling the story." Joy swallowed. He paused, studying her face to see if she was following. "I don't know everything you've been through," he continued, "but I know enough to say this. None of it is your fault." She looked down at her hands, a tear fell onto her wrist, darkening the fabric of her gown. "When I saw you in the street," he said softly, "I thought of my mother. Of all the nights she must have felt alone. I couldn't drive away." A long silence settled between them. Outside, the first cicadas began to hum in the trees. "I don't expect you to trust me," he added, "or to believe this is anything more than pity. But I want you to know this isn't charity. It's a chance. A chance." Joy whispered. He nodded. "To start over, if you want it." Her chest tightened. "Start over. What would that even look like?" "I don't have any money," she said quietly. "I know. I don't have anywhere to go." He nodded again. "That's why I want to help you. You can stay here for as long as you need." Joy shook her head. "Why would you do that?" He took a slow breath. "'Cause someone once did it for me," he said simply. "And I promised I would do the same if I ever had the chance." Joy didn't know how to answer. 100 thoughts tangled in her mind, too many memories, too much. "I don't expect you to decide anything tonight," he said, "but I have a proposal." He placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward her. She stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" she asked. "A small grant," he explained. "Enough to cover whatever you need in the next few weeks. Food, medicine for your mother." Joy's breath caught. Medicine. She thought of Mama's insulin injections, the last box she'd bought on credit. She thought of her, Mother lying in that narrow bed, waiting for news that might never come. Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. "Why?" she whispered. Chike's expression didn't change. "'Cause I can," he said softly. "'Cause I believe. The universe gives us chances to heal the wounds we carry. You don't have to take it, Joy. But if you do, there are no strings attached. No obligations. You owe me nothing." Tears blurred her vision. "Are you always this kind to strangers?" she asked, her voice cracking. He shook his head. "No, only two people I see pieces of myself in." The room felt too quiet. The weight of her life pressed against her shoulders until she thought she might collapse under it, slowly. She set the envelope down. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted. "You don't have to," he said. "Not yet." She swallowed hard. "But I don't want pity." "This isn't pity," he replied. "This is respect. For how hard you've tried to survive." Something inside her cracked open a tiny fissure where hope could slip through. She wiped her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. A tall man in a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes steady and calm. Nothing about him felt predatory. Nothing felt like a lie. But old instinct screamed at her not to trust so easily. "I need time," she whispered. "You can have all the time you need." He rose and walked toward the door. "Rest tonight. Think about what you want. Tomorrow, you can decide." As he stepped out, Joy called after him. Chike!" He turned, eyebrows raised. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. He nodded once. "Yeah? You're welcome." When he was gone, Joy sat in the silence, feeling something unfamiliar unfurl in her chest, a small, tentative belief that she was no longer alone. That night she slept again without nightmares. But in the early dawn, she woke suddenly, heart racing. For a moment she thought she was back in the servants' quarters, Agnes's voice calling her worthless. It took several minutes for her to remember where she was, to remember she was safe. She got up, wrapped herself in a shawl, and went to the window. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew. A single dove landed on the low fence, tilting its head as if studying her. She pressed her palm to the glass. "You don't know me," she whispered to the bird. "You don't know what I've lost." The dove blinked once, then fluttered away, disappearing into the brightening sky. Joy swallowed the lump in her throat. She wondered if she would ever feel light enough to fly. Later that morning, she found Ifema in the kitchen. "Good morning, my dear," Ifema said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, Ma," Joy replied. "You look rested." Joy hesitated. I think I need to call my mother, she said. Softly, Ifuma's expression softened. Of course, use the landline. Joy picked up the phone with trembling hands. She dialed the familiar number, praying it hadn't been disconnected. After 4 rings, a frail voice answered. Hello, Mama, Joy breathed. My child, Mama gasped. Where have you been? I've been so worried. The tears came fast, no matter how hard she tried to stop them. I'm safe, Joy whispered. I'm safe now. Thank God, Mama said, her voice breaking. Thank God. I lost the job, Joy confessed, shame burning her cheeks. I didn't do anything wrong, Mama, but they threw me out. I believe you, Mama said instantly. Whatever they said, I believe you. Joy pressed the phone harder, to her ear, as though she could climb inside it and let that comfort surround her completely. I have some help now, she said carefully. A place to stay, food, someone kind. Mama was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, God has sent you an angel, my daughter. Don't be afraid to accept his gifts. The call ended with whispered blessings. When Joy set the receiver down, her hands were still shaking, but her heart felt steadier later that day. She sat on the back porch, the envelope from Chike resting on her lap. She hadn't opened it yet. Part of her was terrified that it would all vanish if she touched it. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. You haven't looked inside? Ifema asked gently. Joy shook her head. I'm afraid. Afraid of what? That it's not real, she whispered. Ifema came to sit beside her. She laid one warm hand over Joy's cold fingers. Sometimes, she said softly, when life has been cruel for too long, kindness feels like a trick. But it isn't. It's just something you have to practice believing again. Joy looked down at the envelope. She took a slow breath. And finally, she opened it. Inside were neatly folded bills enough to buy food for her mother. Medicine, maybe even a bus ticket home if she needed it. But there was also a small note in Chike's handwriting. This is not the end of your story. It's just the page where you begin again. Her eyes blurred. She pressed the note to her heart. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. About Femi's lies, about Agnes's cold eyes, about the shame she'd carried like a burden. She thought of Chike, and the way he looked at her not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person worth saving, and for the first time, she let herself imagine a different future. A future where she could stand tall. A future where she could tell her own story. In her own voice, sleep finally came, soft and healing. The morning came with a pale sun and the low hum of the gardener trimming hedges outside. Joy woke in the rose-scented room and sat up slowly, feeling as if she had borrowed someone else's life for the night. For a moment, she thought, maybe I could just stay here forever. But she knew that wasn't real. Nothing was free, even if Chike insisted otherwise. She was going to rebuild her life. She couldn't hide behind someone else's gates. She got dressed in the peach gown Ifema had laid out and went downstairs. Chike was gone for meetings, the guards told her. Auntie Ifema gave her a plate of plantain and eggs, but Joy could only pick at it. Her thoughts too loud. After breakfast, she took the small bundle of Naira bills from the envelope and counted it again. Enough to keep Mama's medicine going. For a few months. Enough to eat and sleep under a roof if she was careful. But what would happen after that? She needed work on, she needed it fast. That afternoon, she left the compound on foot. Ifeoma tried to give her the driver, but Joy refused. She didn't want to arrive anywhere in a black SUV with a liveried chauffeur. Needed to look like herself. A girl desperate for a second chance. She walked for over an hour. Her feet were blistered by the time she reached the row of small shops and offices along the dusty street. Her heart thumped painfully as she pushed open the first door at dry cleaning service. The woman behind the counter glanced up, expression already tired. "Help you?" Joy swallowed. "I'm looking for work," she began. "I can clean, iron, serve customers, no vacancies." The woman cut in flatly. Her eyes flicked over Joy's too neat dress and worn sandals, then slid away like she was nothing worth considering. Try somewhere else. She tried the next shop. By mid-afternoon, she had knocked on 17 doors everywhere. She heard the same words: no vacancies. Try next month. We don't need anyone. Few didn't even bother with excuses. They just looked at her with suspicion, as if sensing the desperation clinging to her skin like sweat. Joy sat on a low wall at the edge of a mechanic yard, her throat aching with unshed tears. What am I doing? She had been a fool to think she could just walk back into the world and find a place waiting for her. A skinny boy selling sachets of water came by. She bought one and drank half, splashing the rest on her face. It helped clear her mind enough to stand up. She tried again. A small grocery store with a faded sign. This time the owner was an older woman with silver hair tucked under a scarf. She listened as Joy explained what she could do: cleaning, stocking shelves, handling customers. When Joy finished, the woman sighed and shook her head. My dear, I wish I could help. But my niece already works here, and I can't pay another hand. Joy nodded numbly. Thank you, she whispered. The woman hesitated. You look like you've been through something hard. Joy didn't answer. Todd, the woman leaned closer and lowered her voice. You must be careful who you trust. Lagos is not kind to girls alone. Joy's throat closed around her reply. She turned and walked away. By evening she had spoken to 23 shops. Her legs felt boneless, her heart hollow. Every polite refusal carved a little more hope out of her chest when she finally stumbled back to Chike's compound. The guards opened the gate without question. She walked past them without a word. Auntie Ifamo found her sitting on the back steps, hugging her knees. You didn't find anything? Joy shook her head. I tried, she whispered. I really tried. Ifama sat beside her and said nothing, just placed a warm hand on her back and let her breathe. That night, Chike returned. Joy was in the kitchen, washing her single plate. He stood quietly in the doorway, waiting until she noticed him. When she turned, their eyes met. She expected pity or frustration. Instead, she saw calm understanding. You went out today, he said gently. Yes, she admitted. I thought I could fix everything on my own. Its expression softened. Sometimes fixing things means letting yourself be helped. I don't want to be someone's charity, she snapped before she could stop herself. You're not, Chike said calmly. You're someone who deserves better than what you were given. Her voice cracked. But what if I never find work again? What if everyone believes what Femi said? Chike walked over and placed a hand on the counter between them, close, but not touching her. Then we prove them wrong, he said simply. The next day, he called in a favor. A friend of his, a lawyer named Mr. Obazi, agreed to meet Joy at his office. Chike offered to go with her, but she refused. She needed to do at least this part alone. She took a bus to the lawyer's modest office and waited on a plastic chair. Her stomach twisted as she rehearsed her story. When Mr. Obasi called her in, he listened quietly as she explained everything. The harassment, the lies, the eviction. When she finished, he tapped a pen against his notebook. Do you have any evidence? He asked gently. Joy's throat closed. No, she whispered. I didn't record anything. I was too afraid. Mr. Obasi sighed. My dear, the law is only as strong as the proof you can offer. Without evidence, it will be your word against theirs. Tears burned her eyes. Then there's nothing I can do. He hesitated. Not nothing, but very little. Even if you take them to court, it could take years and you might still lose. Joy pressed her palms to her face. Everything in her sagged. How can the truth matter so little? When she left the office, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. She felt like a shell of herself. That night, she didn't eat. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing she could disappear. Days passed. Each morning she tried again. More shops, more offices, more hopeful conversations that ended in polite rejection. Each evening she returned to Chike's house. her spirit a little thinner. Ifama always had a warm meal ready. Chike never questioned her failures. But Joy began to feel the weight of her own disappointment pressing down harder than any hunger ever had. One evening, she sat with Ifama in the garden. "I thought being free would feel better," Joy confessed. "But it feels empty." Ifama looked at her with kind eyes. "You are grieving, Joy, not just for what you lost, but for the dreams you buried to survive." "I'm so tired," Joy whispered. Ifama reached over and took her hand. "Then rest. You don't have to be strong every moment." For a long time, Joy didn't answer. She just let herself be held. The next morning, Chike asked her a question she hadn't expected. "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" She blinked at him, confused. "I don't understand." "If fear wasn't holding you back," he said quietly, "what life would you build?" Joy looked away, throat tight. "I don't know." But a small voice inside her whispered that wasn't true. "This is not the end of your story. It's just the page where you begin again."